In the classroom, cultural diversity is something that may or may not be present. When it is present, it is important to know and understand how to celebrate that diversity and foster it into an inclusive space for learning. For teachers to properly do this, they need to know what types of cultural influences may impact their teaching or the students' learning, how the environment impacts their language, and strategies to implement that will truly celebrate that diversity. Teachers will also need to learn how to support and nurture the strengths of their culturally diverse students and how to communicate effectively with parents and families of those students, with or without a language barrier. For teachers to understand culturally responsive teaching, they first need to know what types of cultural influences may impact their own teaching as well as students' learning. The first thing to consider is their own personal bias. While we all, most likely, try not to have a bias towards students or cultures, it is important to recognize that they can exist. Sometimes it's without our knowledge. I think sometimes it can be easy to let our ELL students fall by the wayside. Teachers can feel overwhelmed by the potential language barrier and may feel like it is too out of reach to properly support the students. However, this is not the case. During my observations, I spoke directly with a 5th grade teacher who said that her ELL student had more motivation to learn than most of her native English-speaking students. She told me that the student was receiving tons of support at home to successfully complete homework assignments and was actually doing quite well with her approved accommodations. Well, yes, it can be more work to differentiate our instruction to our culturally diverse students. It is critical to do so. An example of a cultural influence that could impact learning also goes hand in hand with what I just mentioned. A teacher who is culturally biased. If a student is part of a classroom where there is not a lot of attention to diversity, that student is likely going to struggle. That student will probably not receive proper supports, and the teacher has potentially already thrown in the towel on that student's success. With all of that said, there are plenty of ways that teachers can celebrate diversity in their classrooms and create an inclusive environment. One example is to have a stocked classroom library where many different cultural backgrounds are represented. Teachers can also allow the students of various cultures to share traditions or other information about their culture with the class, maybe even do some type of food tasting experience. For students whose native language is not English, it is important to have resources available to aid with communication. Culturally responsive teaching is the main focus here, and it is defined as a research-based approach that leverages students' assets, their cultures, languages, and life experiences to create rigorous, student-centered instructions, according to an article through Understood by Carla Vigil. Essentially, it is when teachers play into the strengths of their culturally diverse students and use that to aid in their academic success. Teachers will alter curriculum and lessons to incorporate their student interests, making their education far more engaging. To do this, teachers first need to make sure that they are taking the time to learn about their students. In order to use a student's asset, you first need to know what that asset might be. Once the teachers have an idea of how their students may learn best, they can adjust their instruction to incorporate it. For example, if there are a couple students in a classroom who enjoy art and projects, maybe that can be their version of an assessment. Not everyone learns best by taking notes and completing written tests. In order to adjust the instruction and support the students, teachers have to take the time to understand them. They have to get to know them, get to know their needs, their family life, and support at home. Students want to feel valued and heard. Culturally responsive teaching does that. It will be beneficial academically and for their social and emotional skills. When it comes to the family practices of a student, it can greatly impact their language learning. For example, if a student does not have any English-speaking people at their home, then that student is not gaining much exposure to English outside of the classroom. Not only that, but the student will have potentially less support in their studies if the people at home cannot understand the assignments due to the language barrier. To help build those relationships with families, there are many things a teacher or school can do. One suggestion is to make Sure, families have multiple methods of communicating with the school or the teacher. For example, our school uses Remind, an app that parents or guardians use to message teachers directly. This also allows the family or teacher to translate what is being messaged through the apps, like on Google Translate. Another option for building relationships with the families of ELL students is to send any parent notices home in the native language of the family. The school can also take it a step further and have translated sections of the district's website. This will aid families in feeling welcome to both the school and the community. Culturally diverse students do not have to feel excluded. They can very much feel part of the class, and the teachers can absolutely be a key part in their success. Teachers just need to know how to nurture the students' strengths, incorporate them into lessons, and watch students thrive.